Hello guys, and welcome back to another unit guide tutorial video for the Lord of the Rings Total War mod for the Rome Remastered. Today we'll be going over Rhun and the Easterling faction, and we kind of have a little bit of a different type of unit guide today just because we actually have some chariots we get to talk about today. So without further ado, let's just jump on into the first section here. But I guess quickly, again, thank you all to those who have been subscribing to the channel. Thank you much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. And don't forget to check out some of my other videos as well. And for those of you who are still kind of on the line, whether or not you want to subscribe, I highly encourage you to just hit that subscribe and that bell button on the channel. It really does help me out a lot. So without further ado, let's just jump on into the first group here. I've been thinking about it. I don't know what to call this. The first group here. It's not like it's kind of just infantry, just like bleh infantry. If I could deem it that. The first one here is just like the slaves. The slaves have one purpose. It's never a unit to have in your army. Some settlements, depending on the territory, has the slave building as the Rhun faction, and it gives various like construction cost bonuses and whatnot. Really, the only time I use slaves is just as placeholders in settlements, just to maintain public order. They serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever on the battlefield. It even says in the description here, slaves are not combatants. There's absolutely no point to have them in their armies, but they are a really good and really cheap way to help maintain public order. If you're in a region that doesn't allow you to build the slave building, the next best option is the Clansman Raiders. These guys are just really poor melee combatants. They're really, again, they're kind of just placeholders for public order. They don't really serve any battle importance or any battle strategies whatsoever. Plus, they also take 3 turns to recruit, which I'll talk about once we get into the second section on why that's a big deal. So I mean, the recruitment time, the cost of them isn't that high, but they just absolutely do not serve any purpose on the battlefield. The slaves and the Clansman Raiders here are they're cheap, and they're good at maintaining public order just to have units in your settlements. But other than that, I don't recommend having either of these in your armies. And then the last unit here, the Easterling Warriors. I don't know. I honestly, I don't like them. If we look at them on the battlefield here, they do have a shield, so they're good at, or I shouldn't say they're good at it, but they do provide a better opportunity to protect themselves against missile fire. But they're not armor piercing. They're not anti-large. They're not good against cav units. They're not good against infantry. Just because their attack is really low, and the only reason I don't get these units is just because in the next tier, they're just better units to be had. They're just other units that are better at holding the line, while other units do some damage for you. You can get them if you want them for sure, but there are just better options available to you, in my opinion, which I'll talk about here very shortly, which actually brings us to our second tier. So this is like your mid to high tier units. Starting off here, we have the Easterling War Guards. Excuse me. This is your anti-large, your anti-monster, anti-cav units. So the good thing about these guys is, one, if we look at the stats compared to the Easterling Warriors versus the War Guards, both of these units serve the same purpose. They're there to hold the line. The reason why these are better, if I just move off here so you guys can see the stats here a little bit, they got more defense, they got more defensive skill, they got a better shield, and they have a bonus fighting cav units. And they only take 2 turns to recruit, which, going back to the Clansman Raiders, for a unit, for like these 2 units, even though the Eastern Warriors only take 2 turns to recruit, you know, these 3 units here, if I zoom out here a little bit, these three units here basically serve the same purpose, and that is to hold the line. And these guys just do it better, and they have a bonus against large units. So that's why I recommend going with the War Guards over the first tier here. I don't recruit any of these units ever to be in my armies. Even the Warriors, they just don't have the value in them for me anyway. Just because you just have better alternatives, and really there's not that big of a increase in upkeep costs. So really, the War Guards I really like. They're good at holding the line, which is what you want them to do. They're not gonna by any means be high damage dealers, and that's okay because that's not their role. Which actually brings us to our next unit, which is the Warblades. These guys are really good. They don't have a shield, so they are susceptible to missiles. But if we look at their stats here, they are armor piercing, which this is actually something that I talked to the modding team about, because when I first started playing the mod a few months ago, Rhun had almost no armor piercing other than the golden skills, which is the general's bodyguard, and their main threat are the dwarves for a very long time. And so they just basically had no units that could actually do damage to the dwarven units, especially since dwarf units have 2 hit points. And so I was oftentimes seeing like the Eastling Warriors and the War Guards just get absolutely shredded by the dwarves. And so they gave these guys some armor piercing. So even though they don't have a shield, these guys, for infantry purposes, are kind of your first like damage dealing unit. I actually rushed the military building. I think it's the forge or like the blacksmith that unlocks these, I think. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it is anyway. But these guys are your first like real damage dealing units on the battlefield in terms of melee. Mainly because they just have the armor piercing weapon. They don't have a shield, so they are very susceptible to missiles, but instead of going toe to toe with melee units, get the enemy to throw themselves up against the War Guards here, and then have these guys do some flanking. They're really good at flanking. You'll really see their damage output there. So I tend to have quite a few of these 2 units in my armies, just one to hold the line, and these guys to do some flanking. Just to come to the back side of the enemy if the enemy is right into this gap. That way they're hitting the back or they're hitting the sides of the enemy. And they're just really good damage dealings. But again, do look out for missiles, because once you turn to your side, or even turn to the back here, they do get they're very weak against missiles. But overall, if I just glance at their stats again, their attack isn't high, but again, armor piercing plays a big role into the damage that they do. And their morale is pretty good. So really good unit. Highly recommend getting the Warblades and the War Guards for sure. And then moving on, we have the Red Dragons. These are more of a flanking unit. It's kind of just the Warblades on steroids here a little bit, but they don't have armor piercing. So they do have more morale, more melee attack. Basically their stats in general are just better, but they don't have armor piercing. So when you're going up with the dwarves and playing as Rhun, you will be up against the dwarves for a good chunk of your campaign to start with anyway. I recommend getting the Warblades over the Red Dragons, especially because the Red Dragons are another tier of the military building that you need to recruit them. But once you start going up against less armored troops, these are a really good unit to use, just because, again, if we kind of glanced at their stats comparatively, they're just better at what they do. And since you're going against, say, like the Elves or Dale or Rohan, depending on how far you expand, you're just not going to need the armor piercing as much, and so these guys are a good alternative. That way you can have one or the other, and you're not just strictly kind of held on to having the Warblades. But really good unit. Just again, kind of like the Warblades there. Just look out for missile units. More times than not, I'll see the AI prioritize these 2 units, just because the AI does value these guys as a high damage dealing and high, kind of like a major threat. If you're coming from like Warhammer, these 2 units here are seen as a major threat by the AI. So unless you have the enemy missile units like occupied with cav units or something else, they will prioritize their missile fire on these guys. So just something to be on the lookout for there. And then lastly, the golden scales here, which the models look amazing, very well done. But this is your general's bodyguard unit, and as Rhun, I've played quite a few campaigns with Rhun just because I've tested out different like strategies and scenarios, and you actually get quite a few generals as Rhun, and these guys are really good. They're basically, you know, the Red Dragon's just a little beefier, or like the Warblade's a little beefier, because they do have 2 hit points. They're armor piercing, so they're going to do really good against the dwarves, and they can essentially die twice because of the 2 hit points. And I mean, they're just tanky. They're really good at dealing damage, and really good at, you know, defending themselves from damage as well. So yeah, that's your melee infantry. Really, like, these 4 units here in the group 2 is what I would recommend using to actually be in your armies. And again, this first group here is basically public order and placeholders in your settlements. But moving on to our missile units, you only have 2, but the missile units are very good. The Clansman archers here take 3 turns to recruit. The Easterling warbows take 2. But regardless, if we just look at the stats of them, for a, you know, Rhun not really being missile based, the Clansman raiders and the Easterling warbows do a really good job. Really, the warbows are, you know, the Clansman archers just obviously with the Rhun model, and they do a little more damage. They have a little less range, but they make up for it in missile attack. And they're good. They're good units. You'll get, you know, archers really in the game are still kind of your big damage dealers more times than not. So just make sure, you know, especially for both units, because neither of them do armor piercing damage. So just make sure if you're going up against the dwarves, don't be firing directly into their shields. They do a really good job shooting like into the sides of the enemy, or especially shooting into the back, because their shield obviously isn't, you know, the shield has to be like in front of them. So if you're shooting into the back of dwarves or any enemy unit for that matter, these guys do a really good job. And they also have the flaming arrow. So the flaming arrow, excuse me, you'll give up a little bit on accuracy, but the flaming arrow affects morale a little bit. So if you're going up against some armies or enemy armies that don't have the greatest morale, it may be a good idea to switch it to flaming arrows, excuse me, just when they're kind of like on the verge of breaking, just to see if you can get them to break with a volley of fire arrows coming at them. But going up against the dwarves, I don't recommend using the flaming arrow, just because they're dwarves. They're not going to break. They're not going to be scared of the fire arrow. So just be aware of that. But both units, both are really, really good. Really, it's just if you can afford the warbows, great. And just for the general, you know, detail of the units, it's just an upgraded version, really. But both really good units. Then moving to Chariots, this is the first faction I've covered in terms of the unit guides and whatnot that actually used Chariots. If we just take a look at the stats, one basically just has missile units, or missile damage and ammo, and one doesn't. Stat-wise, they're fairly similar if I just go back and forth. Both of them have 3 hit points, so they can, you know, essentially take more damage than other units. The biggest thing with these guys is make sure you keep cycle charging. Just like in Rome Total War, if you leave your chariots, you know, just prolonged in melee, they do a charge and they just get stuck there. They do get hit a lot, just because of their hitboxes are better. So even though their stats are really good and really high, and they have a really good charge bonus, essentially, you know, they can, if I just take the Clansman Raiders here, say this is an enemy unit, you know, fighting my chariot here, they got at least, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe 12 units hitting one chariot. So it's just be on the lookout for that. Make sure that when you're using the chariots, and both of them can charge. Really, the missile one is mainly just to kind of mess with enemy units, kind of what I've talked about in like Rohan's unit guide and Dales, and the Sylvan Elves, I believe, that have like cav units with like archers. It's just to kind of harass the enemy and pull some enemy units away. But just, charge into the enemy. So, give the attack order and then just tell them to move forward again. So if I start the battle here, just to show you guys, so I'm telling them to say attack an enemy unit here, and they get there, right? They're right here, and they hit the enemy unit, and then just tell them immediately, just double click and pull them through. That way you can, have time to circle back around and charge them again. But a really good unit. I really like the Chariots. It took me a while to really get used to how they work and see how they operate. Because again, any unit really doesn't even have to have a bonus fighting cav like the Easterling War Guards here. You put 10 or 12 unit models fighting one, and those 10 and 12 are going to beat your Chariots, despite their high melee defense here of 23 and 18. But I think you guys will like them a lot. They're really cool to see. They'll just plow over enemy units. Really cool units to use. And then moving on, we just have our basic cav units. These are very similar to like the Dale cav units and other like javelin missile units for cavalry. Really, the Easterling Scout, I've never recruited these guys. One, because they throw javelins. Even though their missile attack is really high, they have to be really close to fire their missile ability or their ammo. So going up against other cav, it's just not a good idea because the enemy cav will get into your face before you even fire. And to use missile units against infantry, you just have better units to do that in your actual missile units in the Clansman Archers and the Easterling Warbows. So I can't. I mean, if you want to recruit them, obviously go for it. They do good damage, it would appear, stat-wise. I just don't personally use them. And they have pretty low morale as well. But the Crimson Riders, these aren't as great as you would think. They don't have a shield, they don't have a spear, but they're really good at running down enemy units, cycle charging into the back of the enemy. They're really good at that. It's just a really good unit to have in your armies if you don't have Chariots, just to run enemy units down at the end of a battle, just so you don't have to deal with them in the next fight. But I mean, really, it's up to you. I usually have just been using Chariots. I have used the Crimson Riders before, but I just think the Chariots are more versatile because they actually do more damage in battles, in my experience, and they can obviously still run enemy units down at the end of the battle. But that is your regular cav units. And then moving on, lastly, to the artillery. I've said it before, I said it again. I don't even know if I'm going to start keeping these in here, but I don't recommend using them. They take forever to recruit. They slow down your enemy on the campaign map. And really the only purpose to have them is for sieges, and the basic siege towers, ladders, rams do a better job than the siege artillery, in my opinion. But with that being said, that is the Rhun roster. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you played as Rhun, what you've seen has worked in terms of army comps or just other units. If you actually have been able to find ways to make the warriors useful, or even like the Easterling Scout Cav. I'm kind of interested to see what you guys think, just because I haven't used those units as much. But don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you have not already. And I will see you guys again soon. Bye.